January 8th, 1945. Lower Manhattan, New York City. Morning rush hour floods the sidewalks around City Hall Park. Streetcars clang. Elevated trains roar overhead. Beneath the feet of thousands of commuters, a subway train slips quietly into a curved tunnel. Then something unusual happens. The doors never open. No passengers step onto the platform. The train slows, bends around a tight arc of track, and disappears back into the darkness. This is the final day New York City's most beautiful subway station will ever serve the public. If you walk along Broadway today, just steps from City Hall, there is no sign that anything extraordinary lies below. No entrance, no signage, no plaque. Yet directly beneath the pavement sits a forgotten space frozen in time. Arched ceilings tiled by master craftsmen, skylights sealed shut, chandeliers long dark. A station designed not for the masses, but for power. This is the story of the City Hall Loop, and how New York buried it. The New York City subway is famous for its scale. 472 stations, hundreds of miles of track, millions of riders every day. But the system didn't begin as a utilitarian grid. When the city's first subway line opened in 1904, it was meant to be a statement, proof that New York had entered a new age of engineering, ambition, and global importance. And nowhere was that ambition more visible than here. Hidden beneath Broadway is a station unlike any other in the system. While most subway stops were built quickly and cheaply, City Hall was treated as a monument. It featured soaring Guastavino tile vaults, stained glass skylights that filtered sunlight from the park above, and brass chandeliers that glowed softly over the platform. It was elegant, ceremonial, almost European in character. But it was never meant for everyone. From the beginning, City Hall Station served a symbolic purpose. It was designed to impress politicians, investors, and foreign dignitaries. The station sat directly beneath New York's seat of government, at the ceremonial gateway to the city. It was the subway as civic theater. Yet less than half a century later, it would be quietly abandoned, sealed not because of disaster or scandal, but because progress had made it obsolete. What went wrong? How does a city abandon one of its most beautiful public spaces and then pretend it never existed? To understand how this station fell into darkness, you have to return to a New York that was choking on its own success. A city at the breaking point, desperate for a solution, buried deep underground. And it starts at the turn of the 20th century. At the dawn of the 20th century, New York City was breaking apart under its own weight. By 1900, more than 3.4 million people lived in Manhattan alone. Immigration was surging. Skyscrapers were rising. Streets designed for horse-drawn wagons were overwhelmed by streetcars, carriages, and pedestrians competing for the same space. Elevated railways, dark, noisy iron structures, cast permanent shadows over major avenues, shaking nearby buildings and drawing fierce public opposition. City leaders knew something had to change. The idea of a subway beneath New York had been discussed for decades, but earlier proposals collapsed under political infighting, engineering doubts, and sheer cost. Digging tunnels beneath one of the densest cities on Earth, through bedrock, water tables, and utility lines, was a terrifying prospect. But by the 1890s, congestion had reached crisis levels. The city could no longer expand outward. It had to go underground. In 1894, the New York State Legislature passed the Rapid Transit Act, authorizing the construction of a subway system. After years of delays and legal battles, the contract was awarded to the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, or IRT, led by financier August Belmont Jr. Construction officially began in 1900. The cost was staggering, approximately $35 million at the time, over $1.2 billion in today's dollars. Unlike later tunnel boring projects, the first subway was built using a brutal but effective method known as cut and cover. Entire streets were ripped open. Wooden sidewalks were erected above open trenches so pedestrians could still pass while workers excavated below. Steam shovels, hand drills, and dynamite were used to carve tunnels through Manhattan's rock. Hundreds of workers labored day and night beneath streets filled with traffic and commerce. Accidents were common. Cave-ins occurred. Entire blocks were disrupted for years at a time. Yet despite the chaos, construction advanced at a remarkable pace. The crown jewel of the entire project was reserved for the southern terminus. City Hall Station was designed not merely as a transit stop, but as a ceremonial entrance to the subway itself. Belmont and city officials wanted a space that would silence critics and justify the enormous expense. To accomplish this, they turned to Rafael Guastavino, a Spanish-born architect and master builder renowned for his self-supporting tile vaults. Guastavino's technique used thin terracotta tiles layered with mortar to create arches that were both strong and fireproof, without the need for heavy steel supports. His work already adorned landmarks like Grand Central Terminal, the Boston Public Library, and Ellis Island. At City Hall, Guastavino was given unusual freedom. The station's ceiling rose more than 12 feet high, forming graceful arches lined with white and green tiles. Skylights embedded in City Hall Park above allowed natural sunlight to filter down to the platform. Brass chandeliers hung from the ceiling, an unheard-of luxury for a subway station. Curved walls followed the arc of the track, creating a space that felt more like a cathedral than a piece of infrastructure. This was not built for the daily grind of commuters. It was built to be seen. When the subway finally opened on October 27, 1904, New Yorkers lined up for hours to ride it. Mayor George B. McClellan, Jr. personally drove the inaugural train from City Hall to Harlem, declaring the subway a triumph of modern civilization. For a brief moment, City Hall Station stood as the symbolic heart of a new New York, faster, denser, and unstoppable. But hidden in its elegant design was a fatal flaw, one that would only become apparent as the city grew beyond anything its builders had imagined. For all its grandeur, City Hall Station was built around a compromise. The station sat at the southern end of the original IRT line, where trains needed to reverse direction. Instead of building a straight terminal with bumper blocks, engineers designed a tight looping track that curved back north toward Brooklyn Bridge City Hall Station. The solution saved space beneath City Hall Park, but it forced the platform into a severe curve, unlike anything else in the system. At the time, it seemed acceptable. Early subway cars were short. Doors were manually operated. Ridership was modest by later standards. But New York does not stay small for long. By the 1910s and 1920s, the subway was carrying far more passengers than its designers had anticipated. Trains grew longer to handle the crowds, eventually reaching 8 and then 10 cars. Automatic doors replaced manual ones. Schedules tightened. Efficiency mattered more than elegance, and City Hall Station began to fail. The curved platform created dangerous gaps between the train and the platform edge. Conductors had difficulty seeing all the doors at once. Some cars could not align with the platform at all, forcing selective door operations that confused riders and slowed service. As safety standards tightened, the station became a liability. Just 2 blocks away, Brooklyn Bridge Station offered a far more practical alternative. It had straight platforms, easier transfers, and higher passenger capacity. Most riders naturally gravitated there instead. City Hall Station's ridership steadily declined. By the 1930s, the station was already an afterthought. Trains still stopped there, but fewer people boarded. The station's chandeliers dimmed. The skylights were gradually blacked out to prevent leaks and vandalism. Maintenance became sporadic. Ironically, the subway's very success was sealing the station's fate. During World War II, ridership surged to unprecedented levels as gasoline rationing and wartime production pushed millions onto public transit. The IRT needed every second of operational efficiency it could get. Stopping at a nearly unused, technically problematic station no longer made sense. In 1945, the decision was made quietly. City Hall Station would close. There was no ceremony, no public outcry, no farewell announcement. On January 8, 1945, the station served its last passengers. The next day, trains simply stopped opening their doors. Officially, the closure was described as a matter of safety and efficiency. Unofficially, it was an admission that beauty had been sacrificed to function. The station that once symbolized the future of New York had become an obstacle to it. Yet unlike many abandoned structures, City Hall Station was not demolished. It was not stripped for parts. It was not repurposed. It was simply sealed. Trains continued to pass through the loop every day, carrying millions of commuters who had no idea what lay just beyond their windows. The station faded from public memory, becoming a rumor, then a myth. But the story does not end with closure, because in the decades that followed, City Hall Station would take on a new life, one defined by secrecy, fascination, and the quiet power of what cities choose to hide. When City Hall Station closed in 1945, New York made a deliberate choice. The city did not tear the station down. It did not wall it off completely. Instead, it allowed the space to remain, intact, silent, and hidden in plain sight. Trains would continue to use the loop track to reverse direction, passing through the station every single day. The platform lights were turned off, entrances were sealed, and officially, City Hall Station ceased to exist. But underground, nothing truly disappears. For decades, subway operators and transit workers were among the few who knew what lay beyond the darkness. Motormen rounding the loop would catch fleeting glimpses of tiled arches and shadowed skylights as their headlights swept across the platform. Conductors spoke quietly of chandeliers still hanging from the ceiling, coated in dust but unbroken. The station became a kind of ghost, visible only in motion, never accessible. As New York entered the post-war era, the subway system itself began to struggle. Deferred maintenance, graffiti, and rising crime defined the transit experience from the 1960s through the early 1980s. Entire stations fell into disrepair. Some were closed permanently, others barely survived. City Hall Station, paradoxically, was protected by its abandonment. Because it was sealed, it escaped the vandalism and neglect that plagued the rest of the system. The skylights remained intact. The Guastavino tiles held firm. Even the station signage, white letters spelling City Hall, survived untouched. Rumors spread. Urban explorers whispered about a lost cathedral under Broadway. Transit enthusiasts debated whether the station still existed at all. Because the Metropolitan Transportation Authority never promoted its presence, City Hall Station slipped out of public consciousness. Maps omitted it. Guidebooks ignored it. By the time the city began revitalizing its subway system in the 1990s, City Hall Station had already become legend. Occasionally, the veil lifted. In rare instances, special tours were arranged for historians, architects, or members of the New York Transit Museum. Visitors descended through locked doors and emergency stairwells into a space that looked almost exactly as it had in 1904, an architectural time capsule preserved by darkness. Those who entered described a surreal experience. Sound behaved differently in the curved vaults. Footsteps echoed softly. Dust motes drifted through shafts of light where skylights still pierced the ceiling. It was beautiful and unsettling. The decision to keep the station sealed was never about secrecy in the conspiratorial sense. It was about practicality. Reopening the station would require extensive renovations to meet modern safety and accessibility standards. The curved platform would need to be rebuilt, elevators installed, emergency exits added. The cost would be enormous, and for a station only 2 blocks from a fully functional alternative, impossible to justify. So City Hall Station remains in a strange limbo. Not abandoned enough to be forgotten, not useful enough to be revived. A monument New York chose not to destroy, but also not to remember. And yet, in the present day, thousands of people still see it without realizing it. Every weekday, during rush hour, Millions of New Yorkers ride the subway without ever thinking about what lies beyond the platform walls. They scroll on their phones. They stare at advertisements. They count the stops until work or home. But a small number of riders experience something unusual. If you stay on a downtown 6 train past its final stop at Brooklyn Bridge, City Hall, the doors close, and the train moves forward instead of stopping. The lights dim slightly. The tunnel curves sharply to the right. And for a brief moment, just seconds, the darkness outside the window gives way to something unexpected. White-tiled arches, a vaulted ceiling, a flash of old station signage. Then it's gone. This fleeting glimpse is the only way most people will ever see City Hall Station. The loop remains a functional piece of subway infrastructure, used daily to turn trains around. Unlike abandoned lines sealed behind concrete walls, this station is still part of the system's circulatory system. Trains pass through it constantly, but passengers are not meant to stop there. For those who know the story, the moment is haunting. The station appears perfectly intact, cleaner even than many active stations. The absence of graffiti is striking. The tiles glow softly in the headlights. The chandeliers, though unlit, still hang where they were installed more than a century ago. It feels less like ruin and more like suspended animation. Preservationists have long pointed to City Hall Station as an argument for the durability of early 20th century craftsmanship. The Guastavino tiles, made of interlocking terracotta, were designed to be fireproof and self-supporting. More than 100 years later, they remain structurally sound, outlasting countless modern renovations elsewhere in the system. In the 1990s, as New York began reinvesting in its subway, the station quietly gained official recognition. In 1979, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2004, on the subway's 100th anniversary, limited public tours were introduced by the New York Transit Museum. Tickets sold out almost immediately. Visitors descended into the station in small groups, guided by museum staff. Many described the experience as emotional, standing in a space once meant to represent the future of the city, now preserved as a relic of its past. Some noted how silent it felt, despite being surrounded by one of the loudest cities in the world. But even these tours are rare. Access remains tightly controlled. For most New Yorkers, City Hall Station is something they sense rather than visit, a presence just beyond reach. And that raises a deeper question. What does it say about a city when one of its most beautiful public spaces is hidden from the public? The answer lies not just in engineering, but in the values that shape urban life. City Hall Station was never meant to be forgotten. When it opened in 1904, it represented a very specific idea of what New York wanted to be: modern, powerful, and refined. The station was not built for efficiency alone, it was built to impress. Its skylights and chandeliers sent a message to anyone descending its stairs. This city valued progress, but it also valued beauty. Over time, that balance shifted. As the 20th century unfolded, New York's priorities changed. Speed overtook ceremony. Capacity replaced craftsmanship. The subway became a tool of necessity rather than a symbol of civic pride. Stations were standardized. Ornamentation was stripped away. What mattered was how many people could be moved, and how fast. City Hall Station did not fail because it was poorly designed. It failed because it was designed for a different era. Urban historians often point to City Hall Station as a turning point in American infrastructure philosophy. After its closure, no subway station in New York would ever again receive the same level of decorative attention. The age of monumental public works gave way to an age of cost control and repetition. Yet the station's survival complicates that narrative. Unlike countless demolished buildings and erased neighborhoods, City Hall Station remains, quietly resisting disappearance. Its existence challenges the idea that cities must always sacrifice the past for the future. It suggests that preservation can occur not only through restoration, but through restraint. There is no plaque above ground announcing what lies below, no glass floor revealing the arches beneath Broadway. The station remains hidden by design, not neglect. That secrecy has transformed it into something more powerful than it ever was as a transit stop. It has become a reminder. For architects and planners, City Hall Station is a lesson in unintended consequences, how engineering decisions ripple across decades. For historians, it is a rare survivor of an early subway era largely erased by modernization. For everyday riders who glimpse it from a passing train, it is a moment of disorientation, a flash of beauty where none is expected. And for the city itself, it is a mirror. New York is often described as a place that never stops rebuilding itself. Buildings rise and fall, neighborhoods transform, entire infrastructures vanish beneath newer ones. Yet beneath the noise and motion, traces of earlier ambitions persist. They are not always meant to be seen. City Hall Station endures, not because the city saved it intentionally, but because no one found a reason to destroy it. In that accidental preservation lies its power. It forces us to confront how much history exists just beyond our awareness, embedded in the systems we use every day. The subway moves millions of people forward, but sometimes it carries the past along with it. There is a moment, just a few seconds long, when the past breaks through the present. A subway car leans into a curve, the tunnel widens, headlights sweep across white tiles and vaulted arches, and then the darkness returns, as if nothing was ever there. Most riders don't notice. Some think it's a reflection. A few recognize it instantly. City Hall Station is not abandoned in the way most forgotten places are. It hasn't collapsed. It hasn't been vandalized. It hasn't been reclaimed by nature. Instead, it exists in a narrow space between use and erasure, a place New York never quite let go of. That makes it rare. In a city known for constant reinvention, City Hall Station stands as proof that disappearance doesn't always require destruction. Sometimes, all it takes is silence. No signs, no access, no explanation. Over time, even the most extraordinary places can fade from collective memory. And yet, this one endured. It endured because it was built well, because it was sealed rather than stripped, because it lay just out of reach, protected by obscurity. What was once intended as a showpiece for politicians has become something far more democratic, a hidden gift to anyone curious enough to notice it. City Hall Station asks a quiet question of every city that builds over its own past. What do we choose to preserve? And what do we allow ourselves to forget? Beneath Broadway, under the footsteps of millions, the answer waits, unchanged since 1904. If you know where to look.